It started with champagne flutes and peonies. My daughter Clara had just married the kind of man who looked good in linen and bad in truth. His name was Ethan Goldenboy Grin Blazer Sleeves, always rolled up just enough to show off the Rolex, and a voice that made even debt sound charming. Their wedding was held on our family's hilltop vineyard, the one my late husband and I built, from dust and desperation. It wasn't just a property, it was the marrow of our marriage, the soil we turned when his cancer got worse, the place I still whispered to him on foggy mornings. After the ceremony, Clara hugged me. "Thank you for everything, Mom," she whispered, eyes gleaming. I should have held on to that moment longer. I should have known the thank you was the start of something I wouldn't recognize until it was almost gone. 2 weeks later, she came by the house with Ethan and a bottle of wine that wasn't from our vines. "We've got an idea," Ethan said, sliding a folder across the kitchen counter. "A tiny business proposal." Clara smiled, but her hands fidgeted in her lap. "It's just paperwork, a small restructuring, legal formality. You're still the owner. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, not yet." I looked at my daughter's smile and remembered the way she used to write her name on the bottoms of my pans with crayon when she was little, and so I said the words I would regret. "I'll take a look." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I brewed tea and finally opened the folder. Page 1 was a power of attorney. Page 2 was a refinancing request. Page 3, a title transfer authorization to list the vineyard as collateral. Clara hadn't just gotten married. She'd married someone who thought he could charm the roots right out from under me. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the paperwork had already been signed. My signature had already been used. Except I hadn't signed a thing, and that was when the air shifted. The notary at the bank didn't blink when I asked about the mortgage. She pulled it up with a practiced smile, tapping her long nails against the desk as the screen loaded. "It looks like the lien was finalized last Tuesday. You signed in person." I stared at her. "No, I didn't." A blink, then another. "Well, according to this," she said, rotating the monitor toward me. "You were here. That's your signature, right?" It was close. It had the same slope, the loop on the L, the long tail on the Y. But it wasn't mine. I leaned in, heart-hammering. "Can you tell me what ID was used?" She clicked around, chewing her gum, too slowly. "California, driver's license ending in 1932. Signature matched the one on file. That was mine." I kept my voice even. "Could I see a timestamp security footage?" Now she paused. "Ma'am." "Please," I said quieter. "If someone forged my name, this is serious." She hesitated, then nodded. It took a call to the branch manager, 2 awkward cups of waiting room coffee, and 15 minutes of grainy footage before the screen lit up with a woman who looked very much like me, except she wasn't me. Same haircut, same scarf, same tired shoes I wore when gardening, but not me. I felt cold bloom across my chest. The woman was Clara, in a gray wig. She kept her head down, slid the papers over, smiled only once briefly when the notary stamped the final page. I covered my mouth with one hand. "Would you like to file a claim?" the manager asked, his voice too polite, too detached. I couldn't answer. My teeth were chattering. My daughter had forged my identity, mortgaged the property, used me, lied with my face. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel like it was the last solid thing left in my life. The house was too quiet when I got there, too still. I walked through each room like I was a ghost in someone else's story. The floors creaked differently. The pictures on the wall looked suspiciously shifted. I went to my safe, the one in the bedroom closet. The key was missing. I opened it with the spare because I always kept one. Inside the folder with the property deed was gone. Just gone. My daughter hadn't just betrayed me. She'd planned this, step by step, with the precision of someone who'd once learned to braid her doll's hair by watching me do it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, watching the driveway through the window, waiting, listening, hoping this was some twisted misunderstanding. But deep down I knew, and fear had finally come home to stay. The next morning I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I got dressed in silence, put on the blazer I hadn't worn since Robert's funeral, and drove straight to the county clerk's office. The clerk was a kind woman with arthritis in her knuckles and suspicion in her eyes. When I asked for the title history on my property, she printed it without flinching. I could see it in her face. This wasn't the first time a parent had come in voice, tight and hands trembling. I scanned the document. It was right there in perfect legal ink. 3 weeks ago, the title to my vineyard had been listed as shared collateral for a business venture called Kind Vine Estates LLC. Ethan's name was listed first, Clara's name was second, mine buried in footnotes. Original owner, non-executive participant, a ghost. They'd mortgaged the vineyard to secure a $1.3 million loan. I nearly choked on the number. That land had been paid off for a decade. We kept it lean, no debt, no partners, just the slow labor of pruning vines and bottling small-batch Merlot. The house sat on the highest ridge built by Robert and me brick by brick. And now my own daughter had signed it over with a forged identity and a fake smile. They didn't just take the land. They took my trust, my home, my husband's legacy. This wasn't a drunken mistake or a miscalculation. This was a blueprint, a business plan etched in betrayal. I drove back to their place. I shouldn't have. I knew better. But rage doesn't ask for permission. Clara answered the door in yoga pants and no makeup hair tossed up in a careless knot. She looked young, too young to be so cruel. Mom, she blinked like I'd surprised her. "Did you call first?" I didn't answer. I pushed past her. "What's wrong?" she asked, following me into the kitchen, her voice tightening. "What's wrong," I said slowly, "is that I just watched surveillance footage of you pretending to be me at the bank." Her face froze. "I know about the mortgage. I know about the LLC. I know about the loan." A beat passed. Then Ethan appeared from the hallway dressed like a trust fund, too clean, too confident. "Eleanor," he said, flashing that snake oil smile, "I think you're misunderstanding what we were trying to do here." "Don't say my name," I hissed. "Please," Clara tried. "Just let us explain." "No, you explain." I snapped. "Why would you steal the deed, forge my name, take out $1 million loan against a house you didn't build?" Her voice cracked. "We didn't steal it. We're investing in the family. Expanding. You said you always wanted." I slammed my hands on the counter. I never said I wanted my dead husband's legacy turned into a tax shelter. Ethan raised both hands. "We thought it'd be easier to fix later. Once the money starts flowing, you forged my life, Ethan." He didn't flinch. "You wouldn't have signed if we asked." There it was, the quiet confession, the brutal, unblinking logic of greed. If someone wouldn't say yes, steal it anyway. I stared at my daughter. She didn't cry, she didn't deny, she just looked away, as if shame were too inconvenient. I walked out without another word, and as I drove home, fists clenched on the steering wheel, I made a promise not to forgive, not to forget, but to fight, because if Clara thought I would just disappear into some old woman's silence, she'd forgotten who raised her. The lawyer I called was an old friend of Robert's, Mitchell Ray. He was quiet, methodical, and deeply Southern. One of those men who said ma'am, whether he was furious or grateful. He met me at his office that afternoon, eyebrows knitting, as I slid the paperwork across his desk. Forgery, fraud, and misrepresentation. He murmured, flipping pages. "You got yourself a special brand of betrayal here, Eleanor. I want to reverse the mortgage," I said. "I want to press charges if I can." He looked at me with something between respect and pity. "They'll drag you through mud, especially if they think there's still fruit left on the vine." He meant the vineyard, but I felt it in my bones. "I don't care," I replied. "Let them drag." That night, Mitchell filed the first motion, a petition for fraud investigation, and a cease and desist on any development under the Kind Vine Estates name. He advised me to change the locks, freeze any remaining joint accounts, and get ready for war. The next morning, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. "You, Eleanor Davis." I nodded. He handed me an envelope. "You've been served." Inside was a civil injunction, filed by my own daughter. Clara was seeking emergency control of the vineyard operation, citing declining mental acuity of original owner and unwillingness to adapt to the evolving needs of the family business. She was trying to have me declared incompetent. The blood drained from my face. I called Mitchell immediately. He read it in silence. Then he said flatly, "They're going full nuclear." The next 48 hours blurred. Clara's attorney emailed Mitchell a proposed settlement I could keep living on the property, but the business assets would remain under Kind Vine Estates. They offered me a $2,500 monthly allowance from future revenue, as if I were an elderly tenant on my own land. I laughed when I read it, a dry, brittle sound I didn't recognize. That night, I heard rustling outside. I turned off the lights and stood behind the curtain. 2 men were walking along the fence with flashlights. Surveyors. Ethan had sent surveyors to measure the vineyard like it was already his. I stepped outside with Robert's old rifle in my arms, not loaded just heavy enough to remind them this was still my soil. The men left in a hurry, but the truth settled like dust in my chest. I wasn't just fighting betrayal. I was fighting time paperwork and the daughter who once used to climb into my lap and say, "Don't ever leave." Well, she hadn't left me. She had erased me. And I had 7 days until the hearing that would decide whether I was still legally sane enough to protect what I'd spent my entire life building. 7 days to prove I was the woman Robert trusted. 7 days to prove I still mattered. The court hearing was set for Tuesday at 10 a.m. By Monday night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of my bedroom, once lined with laughter and the scent of fermentation and lavender oil, now felt like the inside of a locked casket. I had packed a folder for the hearing deed records, original loan-free documentation birth certificates, the ledger Robert and I used to record every season's harvest. I even tucked in a Polaroid of Clara as a child grinning beside the vines and pigtails grape juice staining her chin. I needed to remember who she used to be, because the woman suing me for mental incompetency was not that girl. But that morning before I could even get in the car, Mitchell called. "They filed a continuance," he said, voice tight, "claiming you sent them threatening messages. I haven't spoken to them since they tried to steal the land." I know, but Ethan's lawyer submitted screenshots. Screenshots I opened my phone. My number had been spoofed. Messages I never sent. Dozens of them. "You won't win. You're dead to me. God is watching you liars." Each one time-stamped, spaced out, calculated. They weren't just attacking my rights. They were building a version of me, a bitter, unstable old woman, too emotional to be trusted with dirt, much less $2 million of property. I felt the nausea come in waves. I had taught Clara to tell the truth, to never borrow what she couldn't return, to call me when she was scared. And now she was dragging my name through legal mud, so thick it clung to my bones. Mitchell filed a motion for immediate forensic analysis on the phone data, but it would take time I no longer had. Because later that afternoon, while trying to access the vineyard's water permit through the county's online portal, I discovered something else. The license had been transferred to Kind Vine Estates, to Ethan, without my consent. My vineyard didn't just belong to someone else on paper. Now it functioned under another name. I called Clara. She answered. Why, I asked, my voice small. She was silent. Then, "Because we can't wait forever, Mom. You won't be here forever. Ethan knows how to scale. We have a chance to grow this. You're talking about me like I'm dead. You made it impossible to do this the easy way. I gave you everything." "No," she snapped, and for the first time I heard the rage beneath her polish. "You gave me guilt. You gave me a box of rules and just enough. I want more. I couldn't breathe. I was never enough for you, was I whispered. Her voice cracked. "You're stuck in the past. And if you'd step aside, I wouldn't have to do it this way." I hung up before she could finish. I stood in the hallway alone, holding the phone like a wound. It hit me. Then, not the betrayal. That had already carved its space in me. What hurt worse was the slow realization. I raised her, but I didn't know her, and if I had to destroy her plans to save the life Robert and I built, then I would, even if it shattered whatever piece of her still called me Mom. 2 days later, I arrived at the hearing in a gray wool coat Robert used to call my armor. The courthouse was cold, but I wasn't. Clara and Ethan sat across from me, dressed like mourners. Her eyes flicked to mine, once hesitant. His never moved. He smiled at everyone but me. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a silver bob and the eyes of someone who'd seen too many families torn to pieces, called us forward. "Ms. Davis," she began, "your daughter has filed a petition to assume emergency control of your estate, citing questionable decisions and escalating emotional behavior. Do you have counsel present?" Mitchell rose beside me, calm as water. "I do, Your Honor, and we're ready to submit into evidence a timeline complete with digital forensics and surveillance footage." He handed a thick binder to the clerk. The judge opened it slowly. "What am I looking at?" Mitchell spoke carefully. "Your Honor, what began as a financial dispute escalated when my client's identity was used without her consent. These messages he tapped a printout allegedly sent by Ms. Davis were never transmitted from her device. We hired a forensic specialist. The spoofing originated from an IP address linked to Mr. Ethan Lake's real estate firm. There was a shift in the room. Clara's face drained. Ethan whispered something to his lawyer. Mitchell continued. Furthermore, the transfer of the vineyard's water rights, Exhibit G, was initiated by a falsified digital form. Signatures matched Ms. Davis's style, but the keystroke metadata does not, again traced to the Lake household. The judge narrowed her eyes. Are you accusing her son-in-law of fraud? We're not accusing, Your Honor. We're demonstrating. And lastly, he flipped a final page. We have surveillance footage of Ms. Clara Davis entering a financial institution in disguise to impersonate her mother. I glanced at my daughter then. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge sat back slowly. Is this accurate, Ms. Davis? Her attorney muttered something into her ear. She didn't respond. Not to him, not to me, not even to herself. The silence was loud. The judge cleared her throat. In light of this evidence, the court finds no cause to remove Ms. Eleanor Davis from control of her estate. Furthermore, due to credible evidence of fraudulent action, I am referring this case for criminal review. Ethan stood suddenly. We were trying to protect the land. The judge turned to him sharply. Sir, sit down before I hold you in contempt. Mitchell placed a quiet hand on my wrist. It's done. But it wasn't. Not yet. Because as we walked out of that courtroom, Clara followed. She caught my arm on the courthouse steps. Mom, I turned. She looked like a stranger again, but this time the mask had slipped. Did you want me to fail? She asked softly. No, I said. I wanted you to remember who you were before he taught you how to steal. Tears filled her eyes. You told me to fight for what mattered. I did, I nodded, but I didn't think you'd use those words to justify betrayal. She broke then, right there on the sidewalk. But I didn't hug her. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't, and she needed to feel that. Mitchell opened the car door for me. I climbed in without looking back. Because justice doesn't always end with forgiveness. Sometimes it ends with a signed document, and a daughter who finally realizes her mother isn't weak. She's awake. Weeks passed. The vineyard turned green again, spring creeping through the soil, like forgiveness that wasn't owed, but arrived anyway. The criminal investigation was still pending. Ethan vanished from Clara's life the moment he got served with formal charges. That's the thing about men like him. They vanish before the wreckage settles. He left a single text on her phone. It wasn't supposed to go like this. She never answered it. She did, however, show up at my gate one Sunday. No makeup, no legal folder in her hands, just a wool coat too thin for the wind and a face that had finally run out of strategy. I brought something, she said, voice barely above a whisper. She held out a bottle, our 2015 Merlot. The last vintage Robert ever bottled before the cancer stole his appetite for wine, and nearly everything else. I found a few in storage, she said. I thought you should have them. I took it, not out of warmth, out of respect for the man who had raised her with me. We sat outside, 2 chairs, an old quilt, silence heavy as the sky. I didn't know how far I'd gone, she said after a long while, until it was too late. You knew, I said. Not unkind, not sharp, just truth. She wiped her nose. I thought if I could just make something big enough. I don't know, maybe I'd finally feel like I wasn't stuck. You weren't stuck, I said. You were scared, and instead of asking for help, you stole. She nodded. I don't hate you, Clara. Her eyes flicked to mine. But I'm done saving you. A pause. That doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means I'm choosing me now. I looked out at the vineyard, rows upon rows of careful labor and late nights of love, bottled and sealed by hand. You see that field, I said quietly. Every vine in that ground knows its place, knows what season it belongs to. You forgot yours, and this time I can't prune it back for you. She didn't speak. She just nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long time, I saw no defense in her face, only loss, which meant maybe, just maybe, there was a crack wide enough for something real to grow. We didn't hug. She left quietly. The bottle stayed on the table. Later that evening, I poured a glass, took one sip. It was strong, a little bitter, but full of story, and maybe that was enough. What would you have done if you were her? Leave a comment. Your story could be the one that helps someone else wake up. Subscribe Everglimpse for more true story thrillers like this, where the quiet ones fight back and secrets never stay buried.